All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Like Diana said, today we'll be talking about structuring your database for success to ensure that you have consistent, clean data. And as always, we'll start with our agenda. So today we'll be reviewing why clean data matters. We'll look at the settings cog in Bloomerang. For those of you who do use Bloomerang software, there are a few settings I would strongly recommend reviewing. We'll also discuss campaigns, funds, and appeals, the difference between raised monies and revenue, list segmentation, custom fields. We'll touch on some success planning, and then, as always, we'll have resources at the end and some live Q&A if there's time for it. As a reminder, everyone will receive the slides, the links. I'll answer questions after the class if we don't get to everything live. And I also wanted to mention that if you or a team member would like a transcript of any of the Academy presentations, including this one, let us know it and we would be more than happy to provide them. So we want to make sure that any of our viewers who are hard of hearing have the opportunity to go through the class as well. All right, so let's jump in. Why does clean data matter? Simply put, clean data allows your team's focus to remain on fundraising and constituent cultivation instead of constantly questioning the integrity of your data. Trusting that your entire team understands what needs to be in the database, how it should be entered, and why it needs to be handled the way that it does will not only make your team dynamic more functional, but it will also ensure your efforts aren't being duplicated. Audits will run more smoothly and everyone will be clear on expectations both internally and when it comes to your constituents. Every decision your team makes directly impacts your mission and your return on investment. And this is one place that you guys can really focus some efforts to make sure that those decisions are being made appropriately. As you can see in this slide here, I've pulled up a screenshot of the settings cog here in Bloomerang. So regardless of what database you're using, I recommend finding the section in your database that houses your organization's unique data and ensure that it's accurate. In Bloomerang, you'll click on the settings cog. As a note, if you don't see the settings cog in your Bloomerang, you don't have administrative rights. So only administrators can see the cog. But once you click on the cog, you're going to click on View All Settings. It's in the top row, so you're going to click on All Settings, and then up in the top row, you're going to click on My Organization. So this is where you can update your individual organization contact information, turn on your NCOA settings, link financial software if you're using one of our integrated softwares, set your NTEE codes, and your fiscal year start date. So you can also link social media information, which can be really helpful. And to anyone thinking, why would I want to set up social media accounts? Make sure that you're thinking about that succession planning. So potential high turnover rates, the industry is known for it. And at some point or another, that could impact your organization. So having that information accessible to future employees who may have to pick up that mantle and start using your social media accounts is really important. Kind of to touch on NTEE codes, I have included a link on the slide in case you don't know where to find your NTEE code or need an explanation of it. But knowing your code can be important for things like audits, tax forms that you're filling out, and other kind of reportings for the industry, for grants, that sort of thing. All right, so I'm going to actually show you what this looks like in Bloomerang instead of just describing where to click through. So there we go. All right, so you can see here, I'm on my dashboard homepage, and down here is my settings cog. So I'm going to click on it, click View All Settings, and then up here is my organization. So again, this is where you can set all of that information, do your integrations, turn everything on. But there are a couple other things that I want to touch on kind of quickly in here so that you guys make sure that you know where to find this. You can also update your user and user permissions here. So if you need to add a new user, you'll come in here to do so. You can also change the kind of user that everyone is. So you can see there are a couple administrators listed here. You can come in and you can change permission rights to standard users and whether or not they can add, edit, or delete transactions. You can also set some special preferences and you can get the unique BCC email address to attach for each of your users in the database so that you can ensure that you're able to toggle back and forth from sending emails directly to the database with that BCC instead of having to constantly go in and try to copy paste or attach everything. Another setting that I think is important to be aware of here, again, going to view all settings, is this email setup. So the deliverability settings can be really important. This is where you're going to edit your organization footer information for emails. And you can also take a look at your email sending reputation. If things aren't going well, if you're getting a lot of bounce backs, this is a good area to come in and take a look at. You may need to set up a few additional settings. Support can help you with that. But this is where you can kind of come and see what's happening and make adjustments to that footer. This is also where we find our custom fields and where we find the ability to set up and edit campaigns, funds, and appeals. So we're going to come back to that information, but I did want to show everybody what that looks like and where to find it. All right. So since most nonprofits raise the majority of their funds through some sort of fundraising efforts, I would really recommend discussing internally how you set up your transaction information in the database to ensure consistent data entry and clear data reporting. So we're hopping into campaigns, funds, and appeals here. So in Bloomerang, the largest level of campaigns, funds, and appeals is campaigns. So specifically, campaigns are overarching fundraising efforts. They have a definite financial goal and it's within a date range, so a start and end date. Most nonprofits have only a few campaigns going into any given fiscal year. You have your annual campaign, which has the goal of raising the monies you need to keep the lights on, provide services to your consumers, pay salaries. So it's basically that minimum amount of money that you need to raise to keep things going. If your organization is purchasing assets, so buildings, furniture, technology, you'll put that under a capital campaign. And then finally, large events with a lot of moving parts and clear goals, such as galas, golf tournaments, 5Ks, or other runs, those can absolutely necessitate a separate campaign. I will note that for Bloomerang users, each campaign should have a separate year or multiple years affiliated with it. So for example, your annual campaign or your annual events should always be used just for that 1 year or that one event and then deactivated. So make sure that you're naming it, 2021 golf tournament, 2021 gala, 2021, annual campaign, or fiscal year 2021 annual campaign, depending on what you're using. Capital campaigns are oftentimes multi-year efforts. So naming it, 2021 to 2025 capital campaign can be really important to know which capital effort it is, but you should definitely close it after that effort. So basically, you should never reactivate a capital campaign 10 years later and continue using that one. Make sure in the database that you're deactivating them once they're over. That'll make your data entry cleaner, and it will also ensure that things aren't getting stuck in places they shouldn't be, and that'll streamline your reporting. So next up is funds. Funds are essentially individual buckets of money. It's where the money is going. So if you have a fund called cookies, the assumption for that fund is that that money raised is going to purchase cookies, not that the money came in from a bake sale. The number of funds that a nonprofit has varies very widely, depending on what is being done with the money coming in. So all nonprofits should have some iteration of an unrestricted fund. So I've seen general funds, operational funds, where most needed, the organization name fund, just unrestricted fund. So make sure you have kind of that general bucket of money fund listed. And then depending on the types of programming you do and how your donors can designate monies, you may need a separate fund for each program. So scholarships are an example of specific funds that might be needed at your organization. Another example, again, is like a specific program fund. So if you run a program, for kids dance lessons, that should be a fund. If I can give money specifically to go to kids dance lessons, then you need a fund for that designation. As a note, your major events should not have an event fund unless people are paying money to support the golf outing and not the nonprofit. So make sure that the fund associated with your events are wherever the money is going. So if you are having a golf outing and that money is going to support a specific program, then the campaign would be, this year's golf outing, and the fund would be the program name, that program fund. Also, kind of a note here, funds are the only required field of the 3 campaigns, funds, and appeals that we're talking about here. So campaigns and appeals are completely optional to list out. Funds do not have to be annual. Your unrestricted fund is always going to be your unrestricted fund. Your program funds will exist as long as your programs are active. Your scholarship funds will exist as long as there's scholarship money in them and people are giving to it. The one massive exception to everything I just said about funds is if you're integrating Bloomerang with QuickBooks Online or AppFlows. That integration requires some really specific fund settings, so make sure that you're aware of those as you're setting up those funds. All right, appeals. Appeals are how the money is coming into your organization. I've noted it on the slide, but appeals go by a bunch of different names and all of them do the same thing. Every direct mail piece you send out is an appeal. If your newsletter, for example, has an ask button in it, that's an appeal. Personal solicitations by your board or your executive director are appeals. Major gift asks are appeals. So your appeals usually is the largest pool of the 3. It's any way you're asking for money to come into your organization. And then going back to those large scale events, those might have multiple appeals tied to it. So again, using a golf example, you might have a sponsor appeal. You might have a ticket purchase appeal. I always recommend having like either an invitation or an appeal card, like an invitation or RSVP, for anyone who says no, they're not coming, but they still send you money in support. Players, runners, other types of participants, all of those can be separate appeals because the reason they're giving money, how they're bringing the money in, all of that differs just slightly, and that's information that most nonprofits do need to track for those large events. One question that I get asked pretty regularly is, do I have to set all appeals by year? And my short answer to that is no. There are some appeals that absolutely make sense to have kind of just a static appeal like your funds. If you do your golf outing every single year and it's the same types of appeals coming in, just list sponsorship, player, all of those different things out, and then you'll know which year it's for by the campaign and also by the date range. There are times, however, where it does make sense to have dates on your appeals. Some examples on that would be your year-end appeal. People oftentimes want to see how their year-end appeals stack up against other ones, and putting a date range on that can be really helpful. Special requests, so natural disasters, the pandemic, all of those, it makes sense because like the earthquake, really vague, especially if you live in an area that's earthquake prone. So it can be helpful for future employers to see that you guys have done a special appeal for every earthquake that has happened versus just, one specific one-off appeal at some point. But also, if you only did a specific one-off appeal because your building sustained damage in that earthquake, that's also something that, future employees will need to know. So basically what I would say on that is just be consistent. If you're going to put a date on all of your year-end appeals, make sure you're putting a date on it. If you're going to have just a sponsorship appeal, just make sure you have a sponsorship appeal. So take a look at what's in there, even what's deactivated, and you can use that as a guide for how to move forward in your next fiscal year. All right, another really important financial piece to understand is the difference between revenue amounts and raised amounts. So revenue is cash in the door. We're talking checks, actual cash, pledge payments, credit card donations, recurring gift payments. All of that is revenue. You have it in hand, it's in your bank account. Raised gifts do include that revenue, everything we just talked about, but it also includes pledges. The reason that we make this distinction is that it is really helpful, especially in really large efforts such as a capital campaign, to track your pledges and know how much has been raised. You have that expectation of that money coming in. So if you need $3 million to build a new building, knowing that by 6 months before that you're expected to hit your 3 million goal because of pledge payments, that can help you kind of pace your efforts to understand what else needs to be brought in, and be able to plan for the possibility that all of those pledge payments won't be made. So what else do you need to do? So Bloomerang does allow you to see both of those. I will say an additional note on this for Bloomerang users specifically. The campaign progress bar on your dashboard will not show soft credit amounts, but if you run a report on a particular campaign, the total under the amount column will include soft credits. It does that because the soft credit is tagged with the campaign and you've asked for all gifts that have that campaign. So just be aware of that. And a really easy way to kind of combat that in a report is to add a revenue amount column when you're looking at it, so that you can quickly see, okay, the actual cash in the door on this is X, that raised amount is Y, and that could include soft credits and pledges as well. So kind of 3 different ways to look at that in the database. But I did want to make sure you guys, understood the difference between the two. And then I will also make a special note here. In-kind gifts are kind of a special case. So when you're entering those gifts, the amount should be 0 because it's not cash in the door. It's a gift basket, or it's a car, or it's whatever the item is, or it's services. So, someone came and repaired a leaky roof. But they didn't actually hand you cash. However, there is a fair market value field, and that is determined by the donor. So, if your plumber or roofer says, hey, it cost X amount to fix this problem, or I spent $20 on this gift basket, or, the Kelly Blue Book on this car is $1,000, you can enter that into the fair market value field. But it does not count towards raised or revenue. So, that's something else to be aware of too. Entering in that fair market value is not going to impact, your overall raised amount for a particular campaign. Okay, so now we're going to move away from kind of strictly financial information and spend some time discussing segmentation. There are 3 main points that I want to touch on: why you should worry about segmenting your data, how can you segment your data, and then kind of a tangent to that, what are custom fields and how can they have the direct impact on proper segmentation. So first, why should you worry about segmentation? Because it allows you to address your constituents with maximum impact. So for example, how you would reach out to a board member should be very different than how you reach out to a first-time donor. And when you're sending your solicitation letters, your messaging should be aimed specifically towards your different audiences. So board members and major donors should be different with your messaging than someone who only shows up to your events or so far has only volunteered with you. And that should be different than how you're approaching either current consumers or former consumers or their families. You should also know who should be excluded from certain mailings or communications. So for example, your recurring donors should be taken out of your general appeal rotation, as should your major donor prospects that you are actively pursuing for major gifts. Also, potentially people who have open pledges. If you're in the middle of paying down a $10,000 pledge, getting an appeal level for yet an additional dollar amount could potentially be frustrating. It may also be unwise to solicit certain populations at certain times. So for example, if you're a hospice, deciding to solicit the family of someone whose loved one just passed away could potentially be seen as pretty insensitive. Also soliciting someone who just recently left your homeless shelter for their first apartment. They probably don't have the funds to be giving back quite yet, but in the future, they absolutely will, and that's something that you need to know. So excluding certain constituents can save a lot of money on paper appeals and a lot of unhappy people who feel it's inappropriate to be soliciting them. So kind of as I've alluded to here, there are a few different ways to segment your data. The first way is using financial data. So perhaps you would send one version of your letter to people who have been loyal donors and have given $500 or more every year for the last number of years. So for the last 3 years, for example. Maybe you send a different version to people who gave less than $100 last year. You may even send one to everyone who gave $60 or more last year, asking them to become a recurring donor, or anyone who gave $1,000 or more last year and ask them to give a multi-year pledge. With that said, someone who gave $25 last year is probably not a good candidate for a $5,000 over 3-year pledge. So finances can really impact what you're asking for, and it can kind of give you a grasp on reality of what your target should be and what your return on investment for that appeal is going to be. The other major way is by tagging them with a custom field. As a best practice, I would recommend having a field that illustrates your constituents' relationship to your organization. So some common examples of that relationship would be your board members, former board members, volunteers, staff, former staff, consumers, past consumers, maybe major donors or major donor prospects, alumni, members, a granting organization. So again, kind of depending on what your organization does and what your different efforts are will impact what those fields are. But we're talking about their relationship to you. A couple of notes on this. I would recommend making this field a pick multiple field because it's absolutely possible that someone can be a volunteer and a major gift prospect, or a member of your staff and also a member of your museum, or a former consumer and a board member. And then second, at least in Bloomerang, I would avoid tags like organization, individual, or donor. There are a couple of reasons for that. The first one is everyone in Bloomerang is either an organization or individual. So if you want to pull a report with just individuals, you can already do that using that type. You don't have to have a separate field that you're entering. It's really redundant information. And then believe it or not, the tag donor is much more complicated than it seems on the surface. So does donor mean that they have at least one gift on their record from ever? Just at some point in their history, they gave a gift? Does it mean they've given a gift in the last year, last 3 years. If they lapse in their giving and you no longer consider them a donor, who's in charge of going in and untagging them as a donor? So tracking that when we can pull in a report donor information is probably not really worth your organization's time and resources to manage a tag like that. So in Bloomerang, the custom fields are located under that settings cog. And I would put it under your constituent custom fields. And I would make sure that you are giving it a name that refers back to what you're using it for. So you could call it tag, you could call it your organization name relationships, you could call it constituent codes, you could call it attributes. Call it what you want, but just make sure that everybody is aware that that is how your constituents relate back to your organization as a whole. You can also set up custom fields for interaction notes and transactions in Bloomerang, but it is very, very rare that those would be used for segmentation. There are absolutely exceptions to that, but that main attribute field there, or that main tag, is what is going to be used in most cases. So I just kind of did a lot of talking and threw a lot at you guys. So I wanted to break down some segmentation for you so that you could kind of take a look at this and understand it a little bit better. So on the left, I have the breakdown for financial. So we're breaking it down on revenue, again, not raised, and we can break it down based on a set time frame. So for example, we can look at the time frame of last fiscal year and their cumulative giving, so that cumulative revenue that has come in. So your 4 groups could be a penny to $100, $100 to $250, $250 to $499.99, 500 plus. Your groups are going to be very dependent on what your gift sizes look like. If you are an organization where $500 is considered a major gift, this is going to be a great breakdown for you. If you're an organization where $5,000 is considered a major gift, you're probably going to need to expand these groups out a little bit differently than somebody else would. But just making sure that your messaging to each group, what you're asking for, is realistic, is really, really going to help with those efforts. On the right here, we have custom constituent fields. And I kind of wanted to show you, a couple of ways to break this out. So example 1 is constituents who are going to receive your newsletter. So we have major donors, board members and past board members, volunteers, recurring donors, alumni, past consumers. And then example 2 here, these are the people that I want to receive my appeals. Note that we have past board members. They're on both lists, volunteers on both lists, prospects, alumni, staff. So, not everyone's going to get everything. Some groups are going to get all things. Some groups will get some things. So this can be a really clear way to break out and delineate who falls into which groups and what you're doing with each of those groups. So I'm going to click back over to the database so that we can see a little bit of this segmentation in action. So I'm going to build out a couple of reports for us. And just to let you guys know, my database is a Star Wars database. So there are going to be things in here that really would not apply in the real world, and that's okay. So we'll hop in and we'll take a look here. So you will see under my constituent custom fields that I have a field here called attributes. I have constituent codes in parentheses. So this is that field we've been talking about. You'll notice it's a pick multiple because some people are going to fall into different categories. And I have just kind of a small list here of people. So you will see I have board member. I did that on purpose to show you that you can come in and change this. So now it's board member, and that is now updated on all of the records that have a board member tagged on them. We have current volunteer, major gift prospect, past volunteer, staff member, and veterans. So this is my list of custom fields. Yours might look super different, and that's okay. So I'm going to use some financial data, and then I'm also going to use these custom fields, and we're going to build out some segmentations. So first of all, I want to go in and I want to take a look at constituents who are who've given at least $1,000 in the last year. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to say has transactions. And I'm going to say I want the calculated sum of the revenue amount. So here's some advanced reporting funness for you guys. So I want this to be cumulative. I'm not looking at individual $1,000 donors for this report. So I want to look at $1,000 or more. So $1,000 to infinity. And I want the specific transaction to be from last year. So date is during, and I'm going to say last fiscal year. So I have 8 constituents that fall into this category. So here's my first segmentation. These people gave at least $1,000. I'm going to ask them all to give $1,500 this year. So I'm going to ask them for a $1,500 pledge for this fiscal year. So that is how I would group out that first list. I can even save this and say $1,000 plus donors from last fiscal year. And then I can take this report and I can sync it into an email. So I can come in, go to my email templates. I'm going to do a new one. I'm not going to click through an entire one, but we're going to click here and I'm going to go to filter. And I want to look at a report. And I'm going to select the report that I just built. There it is. And so now I'm going to use this list to build out this segmentation to receive this email. I could also export it to Excel, send it to a mail house if that's how I do my paper appeals. I can also use it as a filter in a letter as well. So I can use that report that I've built and I can reach out to this group of people depending on how I'm going to reach them with my appeal. So that's my first segment. Let's take a look now at using some of those constituent codes. So I'm going to come in, go back to a constituent report, and I'm going to say attributes, constituent codes. And I just want to look at my staff members and my current volunteers. So I'm going to reach out to this group of people. Staff members, maybe we have an employee giving campaign. If I'm doing staff and volunteers, maybe I'm just asking them to, be a VIP at an event. So we're doing an event, and I think it would be really special to send our employees, our staff members, an actual invitation to it so that they see what everyone's receiving. For those who aren't, actually intimately involved in the planning of all of it, I still want to invite them to it. And my volunteers, I want to invite them. You can do this list out for upcoming volunteer events. So maybe we don't require our staff to volunteer with us. So I would like to invite them to come and volunteer with us. We can also take a look here with attributes, and we can do a segment for board members and major gift prospects. So we can take a look at what that list is, and we can say, okay, you're getting a VIP invitation to something, or we're doing a special request, and so I'm going to ask you guys for a lot of money, or we have an upcoming meeting that we would really like these people to attend. So you can use these in a lot of different ways, and you can quickly break out these groups of people. I can also say here, or anybody who gave a certain dollar amount. So back to has transactions. I want to see now specifically individual $1,000 donors. So I don't want people who gave that, cumulative amount. I want actual amounts. So specific transactions, the amount is $1,000. And maybe I want to include people who gave pledges, so I'm not going to look at revenue amount in this. So now we're up to 16. But let's say that I want to exclude anyone who has a certain other kind of constituent custom field. So anyone that has a call sign, I want to exclude them. So now we're down to 14 people instead of 16 people. So you can really use your custom fields and your financial data to curate that very specific list of people that you would like to reach out to for your purposes. All right. So now we are going to talk about succession planning. This is another area where clean data can really have a major impact on, and I think it's important to talk about. If you have ever done a coaching with me, or if you've spent a lot of time on individual calls with me, there is a chance you've heard me say at least once, oh, okay, but what if you get hit by a bus? So if I'm being less dramatic about it, what happens if something serious happens in your life and you have to be out on FMLA? Or what happens if your, walking, talking knowledge base retires? What happens if your organization is hit with a high period of turnover? That is what people mean when they say, what if you get hit by a bus? What is your next step? What do you do if you're gone suddenly for whatever reason? The number one thing that people say that stresses me out when I'm working with them is I will ask them a question about a data point and they'll say, oh, so-and-so knows that. So if I need to know, I just go ask them. Knowledge is power. You should have access to that information, and knowledge hoarding, whether it's kind of accidental due to longevity at the organization, or if it's people who see it as a form of job protection and trying to make themselves seem indispensable, that is not in the best interest of an organization. That institutional knowledge needs to get into your database. I think it's really cool if your grants person knows off the top of their head exactly what grants are due when and when they need to start writing the grants and what their next steps are. But if they are literally the only one at the organization who knows that, what happens if something catastrophic happens? Your grant reports are still going to be due. Your major donors are still going to need to be cultivated. So what happens if your ED or major gifts officer leaves? Frankly, it's inevitable that somebody at your organization with knowledge is going to leave. They're no longer going to be a staff member. So it is really important to get as much of that data into the database or to be accessible as possible. So I really recommend two major things. First, have a policies and procedures manual, both for what is entered into your database and how to do your job day to day. Going back to dramatics, if the whole staff gets hit by a bus, or if there's a mass exodus for some reason, and the board has to step in and run your day-to-day operations while they're also trying to fill positions and continue with your mission, they should be able to follow a guide for how and when to do each of your job duties. And then when that position is filled, that new person should also be able to take up the mantle and continue with your efforts. So it is really, really important, to have that. You should also probably have a backup at your organization for each of your positions. Shadow somebody else. Have that person be your designated disaster person for your position. If something happens and, your grant reports are due, there is somebody else in that office who knows how to do your grant reports. I'm a former grants officer, which is why I keep using that as an example. But it's really, really important. And I can let you guys know from experience, it is incredibly stressful to walk into a new job and not have any passwords, not know how to, submit your grant information or what the schedule is or how long your grant periods are or where you are in it. So being able to cut out that absolute panic from your new person and having to triage the entire situation to figure out what to do really is best for the organization. So to that point, I would also like to warn you all against the dangers of data hoarding. So while you're creating these policies and procedures manuals, and anytime you're entering optional data into the database, so optional data would include your custom fields, any non-required fields. Make sure that your team is asking 2 questions. The first one is, how is this helping us fundraise? The second one is, how is this helping us further our mission? As an example of this, having a custom field where you can record your constituent's favorite animal may be incredibly helpful if you're an animal welfare agency or an animal rescue agency. But if you're working with people recovering from drug addiction and you are not issuing, emotional support animals based on their favorite animal preferences, you really need to decide if that data is actually helping you fundraise or even if it's relevant to your mission. If the answer is no, get rid of the data because it is distracting you from your purpose. So if at this point you are thinking about your database and completely panicking, take a deep breath. We have resources to help you get on track. We also, are aware that there are a lot of cases where it is perfectly acceptable to acknowledge that the way that some things have been done have been a bit haphazard or worse. But moving forward, you're going to make, some consistent efforts and changes and have specific expectations from your staff and from anyone else who's touching your database. So some of the ways that Bloomerang can help. So we have a class on database management essentials. It's being taught by me live next week. But this class is going to talk about that policies and procedures manual. It's going to go a little more in depth into some of the areas we've touched on today. We also have a class called Clean Up Your Data to Improve Your Fundraising. So if you know there's some data cleanup that needs to be done, that's going to walk you through, how to manage it, where to start, all of that. Bloomerang also does have data services. So, we can do mass deletes. If you have, constituents in your database that haven't given in the last 15 years and you just need to get rid of them, we can help with that. We can also help with custom fields cleanup, campaign fund and appeal cleanup, a whole lot of other kinds of cleanup too. Those are just kind of the main ones we usually do. We also do offer coaching services. So we have a new user success plan. If you are brand new, if someone got hit by a bus and now you're stepping in and you need to very quickly figure out how to use the system, that's going to be a great resource for you. We also have different coaching classes on tracking organization efforts, communication cultivation, filtering, that includes segmenting. So there's a hot tip there. And then adding any additional data into the database. So that's kind of a smattering of some of the classes that we have and what we can do with you there. But you can work with a coach and figure all of that out. We also do offer consulting services. So we have cleanup consulting. If you know you need to get your campaigns, funds, and appeals cleaned up, but you don't know how to actually do that, we can help. We also offer customized consulting where I can sit down with you and really help you figure out how to solve, specific problems within your database, whether that's needing to switch how it's tracked or understanding what's in there or building a new process for your data. We can do all of that. So if you're not going to use data services or some of those consulting services and you are just going to say, okay, we acknowledge the mess, we're going to move forward, just be aware that for a little while, you are probably going to have to pull pieces of data, so reports, in 2 different ways, kind of, the old way, and then the new, cleaner shinier way. So note that in your procedure. So, to access piece of data X before fiscal year 2021, do this. To access this data afterwards, do this. So maybe it's to access it before this date, you're going to need to pull these 4 different funds into this to get all of your unrestricted dollars. After that, just click on the unrestricted fund and that'll give you everything. So there are ways to manage it without using our services or, the services that may or may not be offered by your current database. If you are interested in pricing on any of the paid services or additional information on anything, Diana just popped up a survey here, so you can let us know, what you're interested in. Some of this may also take a larger, effort at your organization. It may come a little bit later on. You guys really need to try to convince someone to do a mass delete, or, you really need to rein in your biggest data hoarder. You can always reach out to either your customer success contact, and if you don't know who that is, reach out to the support team and they can get you to the right person.